Portnoy, but my vote's with Warren Buffett.
Belita, what is your cash position right now, and what are you looking to buy?
So we're very lucky. We have the privilege of being able to invest in Asia and in markets such as Japan, where we think there actually are companies that are excellent investments. So Japan, in stark contrast to the U.S., is undervalued, we think. Maybe not the market as a whole, but there are a lot of companies that are ignored and undervalued. So if you think about Japan, the things that have held it back for 2 decades, such as poor governance reform, hoarding cash on corporate balance sheets, and not much accountability to minority shareholders. I actually, and perhaps even lifetime employment, are actually assets now in this particular circumstance with the pandemic and the economic crisis that's followed. So Japanese companies have a lot of cash, which is a huge advantage. They have lifetime employment, so perhaps unemployment might rise from, say, 2.5 to 3.5, but that's about as bad as it's going to get. And they have this culture of very high standards of personal hygiene, together with customs such as bowing instead of shaking hands or hugging, and obedience to authority. So they've managed extremely, yes.
We heard from Trump overnight talking about a possible complete decoupling from China. You're looking at a decoupling in the tech space. How do you play that? How do you trade that?
So with the decoupling is motivated by securing our supply chain. And it's very important for the U.S. to be able to secure its supply chain, not just domestically, but with partners with whom there are strong political ties. So there will be beneficiaries from this decoupling, such as Japan, such as Taiwan, such as South Korea. And we think that tech companies, which have strong businesses that are well run, where the management is willing to share the wealth of the company with minority shareholders, to us are good investments in this scenario where the U.S.-China decoupling proceeds. And I think it's unavoidable that it will proceed. So we're looking carefully at all three of those markets, at companies that we think will thrive after the pandemic and will be able to first survive the pandemic.
Yeah, Belita, so what are you looking at exactly? And how do you then draw in what's going on macroeconomically? I mean, is there any point in looking at what's going on with the economic data? In fact, a study done by New York University suggests that there's no correlation, a meaningful correlation between the macroeconomic picture and the stock market going back to 1960. So that leaves many smart investors floundering a little bit. So how do you look at valuations? Do you actually look at what valuation a company should be trading at as opposed to what it is actually trading at?
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly how we invest. We look at investments one company at a time, and we assess the intrinsic value of the company, and we try and buy those businesses that we deem to be good businesses with a margin of safety. Ideally, you should be able to buy a company at, say, a 30 to 50% discount if you're lucky, and that's what we are able to find in Japan, for example, and also in Korea. Less so in Taiwan because that market's a little more expensive. But there's enormous growth in some of the companies looking ahead in Taiwan. So it's while the market as a whole might not correlate, it doesn't really matter if the company that you're invested in is able to compound growth on its own based on a compounding of its earnings and an expansion of its top line through wise acquisitions or expansions in the area that it can compete. So I'll give you a specific example. There's a company that it's a company we've looked at for a long time. It's SMC. It's a pneumatic manufacturer of switches for many pieces of equipment. And that's a company that's well run, has a dominant position in the on the global front. And it's a company we've looked at for a long time but never could buy because it just wasn't cheap enough. But with the pandemic and the crisis, the prices finally got to a point where we were able to buy the company. So that's just one example. And then there are many companies in Japan, as you all know, which are in the online content space, which are very competitive.
You've got a bipartisan piece of legislation that would impact AmeriCorps. Tell us about it.
AmeriCorps is a national service program that allows young Americans to spend a year in service to our country through a local nonprofit and earn some money for college, a living stipend, and